Good afternoon. Tuesday, March, what is it? 31st? So, yeah, another day, another engagement in terms of our world and all that's going on. Seems like with each day there's new information, new calls and measures of safety given. I'm just intrigued by the whole idea that recently we're hearing that we should only be doing things that are essential, and then those things that are open would be those things that are essential. And just the whole question that we confront in terms of just what is essential in our lives, is really an important one for us to consider. And hopefully, what would be essential is our relationship with God, what He has called the church to be. And so recognizing that, and I think the reason why I started these daily videos was to the extent that you couldn't come to us, I wanted to come to you. And so that's the kind of the whole point. And I'm continuing to think and pray and seek God's wisdom as to how best to minister to the congregation of Living Hope in a time where we can't connect together. So to the extent that you have thoughts or ideas, feel free to contact me. Always available by phone, email. If you wanted to meet personally and do it in a safe way, would always be willing to do that. And then we will, to just understand, we will continue to do the Sunday live Facebook Live. I have joked to myself. I wonder to whether we'll ever be restricted to be with ourselves. That. Oh yeah, you have to keep 6 feet away from people. Now it's 10 people, it's 5 people, it's 3 people. Now you can't be with yourself. No, because of the fact that I will always be available to be here and do whatever. That's just how passionate I am about the church, how passionate I am about God's Word. And so again, just working through these passages that really point to God's power to encourage us in this. So we are in the Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, where we have Jesus calming of the storm. And then where we left last Friday, is Jesus being asleep while this squall was happening, this storm that even made the fishermen nervous. And when we see the disciples' question, it's very significant. Again, Jesus was in the stern, it says in verse 38, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And it kind of makes sense that they would ask that question because it seems like Jesus is sleeping is communicating that he doesn't care. He's not aware. He's not care. He's not doing anything. And I think there are times in our lives where it seems like God is silent, that God isn't working, that He's not doing anything. And His inactivity may cause us to think, do you really know? Do you really care? And so when we see just what's happening here in this story, to know that if the disciples hadn't woken Jesus, would He have stayed asleep? And if He did, then what would that have said? Because I believe He would have stayed asleep. And the reality would have been that His presence would have been enough. That even independent of His engagement with the wind and the water, and independent of what He would speak into the situation, that as long as He's asleep, He's got it under control. As long as God is on the throne and He's present in our life, He's in control. It kind of independent of how He's moving, how He's acting, what He's doing. Is He doing what we see fit, what we see as important, what we want Him to accomplish and do? And so we have to understand that if the disciples hadn't engaged with Jesus, it's kind of unlikely He would have continued to sleep. Or maybe if the storm woke Him up, then He would have done something about it. But just His mere presence with them should have been enough. And I think that's part of the message. Am I sleeping? Isn't an expression of me not caring. It's an expression of my control, an expression of the rest that I'm in the midst of the turmoil, in the midst of the problems, in the midst of the circumstances of life and the problems that seem overwhelming to us, they are not overwhelming to God. But what's interesting to me is when they say that, now Jesus does something. So basically, even though He's going to chastise them for their lack of faith and cause them to question, what were you thinking in the first place? He does act and then to express his care. And so sometimes when we may be, thinking God isn't acting well enough or good enough or whatever, and then we're making requests, we're saying, God, what are you doing? Why aren't you working? So on and so forth. I think sometimes he will remain silent. So we are tested in terms of believing that he's doing and acting even when we don't see it, even though we don't recognize it. But other times he will act, and that's what happens here. So he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And boy, what it would have been like to be there, to see the dramatic difference between storm and peace. Because I think that's kind of the message of the story. That even though when it comes to our lives and what we can accomplish in the presence of the problems we have, we do our best, and I think we're responsible to do our best. We do what we can do. But then to recognize God's control, to recognize his sovereignty, to recognize his power, recognize his presence, and all that is intended to do, how it's supposed to matter, to know that God, at any moment that he wants to, just snaps his finger, speaks a word, and boom, it's done. Boom, it's over. And that's just the nature of the power of God. That's the nature of his control over things. I think when it comes to weather, when it comes to the sea, if you've ever been on a boat, you've ever been on the beach, you know that, the wind and the waves can get to a point where we really are threatened. Like this is a thing that is clearly more powerful than us. And yet we're connected to a God that is still more powerful than that. And that is the confidence, that is the comfort that we have in terms of our lives, to know that our God is still more powerful than anything we might face. He has made the wind and the waves. He has fashioned the laws of chemistry and weather and pressure and all the things that bring about the dynamics of what we experience in our lives. And so in a moment, he can just change the dynamics. He control the minutia of chemistry and biology and weather and all the things that come together. Because he is the creator, he is able to intervene. And so I would love to have been there to see the difference between the disruption and the chaos that is in the storm, that's in our lives at times, that's in our life right now, and yet Jesus just speaks a word and it's done. Now, I think he allows us, sometimes he causes storms as well in terms of building faith and character and so on and so forth. I don't think he's caused, corona, and I think there are things that he doesn't cause, that it's just a normal course of life. It's a normal part of being in a world that's broken. And so, but still, God is still in control. He can still intervene. And the point he brings to them is, he said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And what I find significant about this situation, the circumstance they were in, it was an opportunity for them to take a situation that overwhelmed them and choose to believe God. And what Jesus is pointing out is a gap that exists. The gap that existed between where their faith should have been and where it is. And Jesus makes a point to point that out. Like, do you still have no faith? Do you really not believe that when I'm in the boat, and even if I'm asleep, I'm still in control? I'm still doing a work. I'm still able to provide and protect, even though I'm doing what I see to be normal or right in the lesson that I'm teaching you right now. And so that faith is vitally important. I mean, God can be all that he is. He can provide all that he can provide. He can do all that he can do. But if we don't believe him, if we don't trust him, if we don't make the knowledge of God substantive in our life, and I think that's what faith does. Faith takes the knowledge of God, takes who he is and what he has promised and what his word communicates, and makes it substantive to us. And that's what Jesus is recognizing. Your faith was not substantive. Your faith did not change your behavior. Your faith did not just believe me to do what I saw fit in the moment of where I am. And that's what the situation we're in calls for. That's certainly what this passage calls for. I think that's what all of life calls for. As we're dealing with things that are overwhelming to us, it's never overwhelming to God. He always has his presence. He always has provision. He always has his promise. Those P's of the Christian life that I talked about, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, so essential in terms of what solidifies us. And I just really, I love this story because I love all the pieces of it. You know, it says in verse 41 here, now they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And isn't that the main question that confronts all of us? Who is this? What has God revealed himself to be? Who do we believe Jesus to be? Who do people say that I am? Is something that Jesus will ask the disciples later on. And basically it boils down to, who do you say that I am? Who do you understand Jesus to be? And again, is that going to matter? Is that going to be substantive? And so as we confront the different situations of life, again, we can't control them oftentimes, but that's not the key. The key is not our ability to control. It's about our ability to believe. I shouldn't even say ability. It's our willingness to believe. Are we going to rest in the knowledge of what I know God to be, what God has revealed himself to be, how God condescends himself to make provision and reveal himself in our life so that we can understand the knowledge of God and then believe it. And then the next time the problem comes, we're better. Our faith is stronger. And we're able to rest. We're able to have that peace. We're able to have that joy because we believe that God is able. We believe that God's presence is enough and that he does care. See, when God cares and is able and has made a plan, that's all that should matter. To know that God cares for you, to know that God is with you, and that he has a plan. Again, believing in those things should be the very thing that solidifies us. Whether we're on the Sea of Galilee and a storm confronts us that we didn't know where it came from, don't know what we're going to do, it's threatening us, it's overwhelming us, or whether it's something like the coronavirus or other things that we might confront in our life. This is not the last thing that's going to happen that is going to throw the world for a tizzy, throw you in a tizzy in terms of just what you're confronting in life. And just to know that God always stands desiring for you to know him, desiring to know that as long as Jesus is here, he's gonna take care of it. And so as long as Jesus is in my life, as long as, again, my faith is making his presence substantive, that it matters to me, then we'll have that peace. I think peace is the litmus test about how substantive our faith is. And so I may, do a little bit more on this in terms of just the nature of faith and so on and so forth next time. I'm a little torn about whether I will do this now just a couple times a week rather than every day. But really, again, my desire is to orient you to the things of God and reach out to you when you are not able to come here. And I hope that you find these things useful. All right, God bless. And know you're in my thoughts and in my prayers.